Hello, this is the first in a series of recordings about Quarkus Backstage. Now, Quarkus has quite a few extensions related to the platform: Quarkus Kubernetes, Quarkus Helm, Quarkus Argo CD, to name a few. Quarkus Backstage is the latest addition to that family, and Quarkus Backstage is an extension that is meant to integrate all other platform-related extensions and provide a very neat user experience, which is what I wanted to capture and deliver in this series of videos. In the first part, the first recording, I will demonstrate Quarkus, a mechanism, a feature that Quarkus Backstage provides, which is about generating a catalog info for my application that is not a generic catalog info, but it is a tailor-made for the needs of my application, which is also pretty smart, has the ability to detect and expose APIs and things like this. First thing first, I'm going to need a Quarkus application. I'll call it Hello Backstage. I'm going to initialize a Git repository inside it. I'm going to add everything, create an initial commit, and then remote add my Hello Backstage repository, and finally I'm going to push everything there. Now I could switch back to my Backstage console and do a create. This is an empty Backstage installation that I have, almost empty, that is running on OpenShift, and I could come here and do something like pass the URL to my repository, click analyze, and get a catalog info file generated by Backstage itself. So why do I need a mechanism that generates the catalog info instead of having Backstage do that for me? The main reason is that while Backstage is able to generate an initial catalog info, it does not do any kind of maintenance. So for example, if things change about my app, Backstage won't know it. On the other hand, Quarkus Backstage can hook into the Quarkus build system and extract as many information as possible and update the catalog info file with all the info extracted from the Quarkus build system. So instead of having Backstage generated, what I can do is use a CLI application, a CLI plugin for Backstage that can do something like entities generate all entities that are provided by this repository. And once Quarkus Backstage entities file is generated, we can see that behind the scenes it does something like a build. We see that it generated a component called Hello Backstage, and it's added in the root of my repository. Let's take a peek of how it looks like. Simple component that points to the GitHub repository of my application, and also we see that it adds some labels related to the Quarkus version that we're using and stuff like that, and also some tags like Java and Quarkus, which is the framework the app is using. Okay, that is not very different from what Backstage itself would generate. Most probably Backstage itself would miss the label about the Quarkus version, but at this point is no biggie. But what if we exposed an API? So what if I use my Quarkus CLI to add an extension like small I open API, and then modify my application.properties in order to add a configuration property that allows me to expose and adapt the OpenAPI schema for REST endpoints of my application in the root directory. So now if I do that, build my application, and then try to regenerate the entities, we'll see that along with the component that we get, we will also get an API. So let's try regenerate our entities. Quarkus Backstage entities generate. And as promised, I now have a component and an API. Let's take a peek at the generated API. It's an API entity that points to the OpenAPI YAML that has been generated by the Quarkus small-rai extension. And we can see that the OpenAPI YAML and JSON files are in the root of my repository. And the great thing about that is that Quarkus Backstage also allows me to not only generate things, but also install them to my target Backstage installation. And I'm informed that an action like this would trigger behind the scenes a git commit and push, and I'm prompted if I'm on board with something like this. I will click yes, and it will add everything I need. It will push the changes to Backstage, and finally it will install them to my installation. And I can switch to my console and see my component, and now I can click to my Hello Backstage component and also see that this component exposes an API, and I can even see the definition of the API and those kind of things. Yeah, for now it's an empty Quarkus REST application that just exposes Hello endpoint. But the great thing about this whole mechanism is that I can keep on building the app, adding more paths, renaming existing ones, removing paths, or even do things like adding other kind of APIs, gRPC, and more. And with a mechanism like that, I can keep my entities up to date. Now, you may be wondering how was the Quarkus CLI was able to communicate with my Backstage installation, which I don't know if I already mentioned is hosted on an OpenShift cluster that I'm using. This is done through some environment variables that I have configured. For example, I'm using, if I remember correctly, Quarkus Backstage token, which is the token that I'm using for service-to-service connectivity in my Backstage installation. And the Backstage URL is also exposed as an environment variable. And currently I'm using a localhost, but I'm using a port forwarding from localhost to the target cluster. So this is the way that I'm currently connected. Also, it was mentioning that the way that I'm enabling the Quarkus Backstage CLI plugin is with a mechanism like this one, Quarkus plug add Quarkiverse Backstage. The artifact ID is io.quarkiverse.backstage. The group ID is that, column artifact ID, which is Quarkus-Backstage-CLI, column the version. I'm currently experimenting with some new features, so I'm using the snapshot version, but there are quite a few versions available on Maven Central that you can use. Once you run a command like this, then you're able to use Backstage from within your project, or you can use, I think the flag is a user or something like that, which allows you to use this extension globally. And with that, I think that I conclude the first recording. So let me recap. I used the Quarkus Backstage CLI plugin in order to generate and install entities for my application. I didn't have to add any kind of extension in the project itself, which is really nice, because I don't have to, to add noise to my POM or Gradle configuration. We also saw and had the opportunity to see how the generation mechanism is smart enough to figure out which are the APIs exposed by the application. And finally, we saw how we can use the install command in order to install those resources to the target cluster. Hope you found it useful, and till the next one, bye bye.